The sea still smelled of smoke and blood when Captain William Carter stepped onto the black sand. The battle for the island had ended only days ago, yet the air refused to forget. Around him, the Marines worked in silence, burying bodies that the tide kept giving back. Victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like exhaustion dressed in khaki. Carter's eyes scanned the coast. Palm trees bent under the wind. The jungle beyond whispered with unseen eyes. A convoy of trucks approached, kicking up ash and dust. In the back, 10 Japanese prisoners sat with bound hands and unreadable faces. One of them, older, rigid, kept his gaze fixed on the horizon. Another, barely more than a boy, trembled each time an engine roared. "Captain," said Sergeant Miller, wiping sweat from his neck, "POWs from the North Ridge. Orders say we process them here." Carter nodded. "They're soldiers. Make sure the men remember that." Miller hesitated. "Sir, some of the boys lost friends out there. They're not in the mood to play nice." "I'm not asking for nice," Carter replied. "I'm asking for discipline." The prisoners were lined up near the temporary fence, a patch of barbed wire and wooden posts that looked as tired as the men guarding it. The older one, Corporal Sato, stood tall despite the bruise on his temple. The younger, Private Nakamura, couldn't stop staring at the ground. One of the Americans spat near Sato's feet. "You don't look so brave now, do you?" Sato didn't answer. He simply closed his eyes for a moment, muttering something in Japanese. Carter caught the tone, not arrogance, but prayer. "Cut it out," Carter said sharply. "We're not animals." The soldier stepped back, shame flickering for just a second before resentment returned. As the sun fell, the island began to glow with the orange of dying firelight. Carter watched his men eat from their tins, their laughter brittle and forced. A few yards away, the prisoners received rice and water. One of them hesitated before eating, as if waiting for permission that never came. A nurse appeared beside Carter, her uniform streaked with dust. Sarah Coleman had been on the island since the landings, patching bullet holes in bodies and spirits alike. "They don't talk much, do they?" she said softly. "They're trained not to," Carter replied, "and maybe they just don't see the point." Sarah watched as Nakamura tried clumsily to drink without spilling. "They look lost." Carter exhaled. "So do we." The sound of a generator sputtered to life somewhere near the mess tent. Then a flicker, a white square of light projected against a canvas sheet. Someone had set up a film reel. Laughter echoed faintly through the camp as the first frames rolled. Sato lifted his head toward the glow, confused. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the sound of joy. His lips moved again, this time not in prayer but disbelief. Carter followed his gaze, the projector's light dancing across his face. "Strange world," he murmured. "Even in hell, someone finds time for a movie." He didn't yet know that flickering beam of light would change everything. Morning arrived with the heat of punishment. The air was thick, heavy with salt and decay. Captain Carter stood outside the command tent, reading the message stamped in red. Priority: extract all intelligence regarding enemy movements within 72 hours. The typewritten words felt colder than the metal dog tag against his chest. Inside, Colonel Reeves paced with his usual thunderous impatience. "Washington wants results, Bill," he said. "They're not interested in your philosophy of kindness. These prisoners know where the next attack is coming from." Carter kept his tone steady. "With respect, sir, we don't know that, and beating men half dead won't make them talk faster." Reeves stopped, narrowing his eyes. "You think they'd hesitate to cut your throat? You've seen what they do. They don't surrender. They don't break. The only language they understand is fear." Carter folded the paper, sliding it into his pocket. "If we become like them to win, what exactly are we winning?" For a moment, silence burned between them. Reeves's voice softened only slightly. "You've always been too sentimental, Carter. That'll get you and your men killed." Carter left the tent, his stomach turning. Outside, the camp was waking up. The sound of boots, the clatter of tin cups, the low hum of the generator. The prisoners sat in a line, guarded but calm. Sato's posture was unbroken, defiant, but not hostile. Carter wondered what kind of discipline kept a man so composed after losing everything. Sergeant Miller approached, lowering his voice. "Colonel wants interrogation to start tonight." "Who's doing it?" Carter asked. Henderson volunteered. Carter frowned. "Tell him I'll handle it myself." Miller hesitated. "Sir, with respect, Henderson's not going to like that. The men already think you're protecting the enemy." "I'm protecting the uniform," Carter said firmly. "Ours." Miller gave a slow nod. "Aye, Captain." Hours later, Carter sat in the makeshift office staring at a blank report form. His pen didn't move. He could still hear Reeves's voice echoing, "They only understand fear." Yet he remembered Nakamura's trembling hands when he tried to drink water, Sarah's quiet compassion as she tended wounds that looked too human to belong to an enemy. The flap of the tent opened. Sarah stepped in, holding a small tray. "You look like you haven't eaten in a day." He smiled faintly. "I've been arguing with ghosts." "Who's winning?" "Not me." She placed the tray down. "I heard about the interrogation." Carter nodded. "It'll be calm. I just want to talk." "Talk," she repeated softly. "That's not a word they like much around here." Carter leaned back, the candle flickering between them. "I don't care what Reeves thinks. If I let cruelty make my choices, I'll forget what side I'm on." Outside, the jungle whispered with the sound of cicadas. In the distance, the prisoners' shadows stretched long against the wire fence. The night carried both promise and threat, and somewhere deep down, Carter felt a question he couldn't yet answer. Who would war turn him into next? By dawn, the camp was already alive with movement. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the mingled scents of salt, diesel, and boiled rations. American guards shuffled between tents, half awake, their cigarettes glowing faintly like fireflies in the grey morning. Beyond the wire, the Japanese prisoners knelt in silence, heads bowed, performing their morning rituals. Captain Carter watched them from a distance, coffee tin in hand. He couldn't tell if it was prayer or discipline, maybe both. Their quietness unsettled some of the men. It reminded them of ghosts that refused to leave. Sergeant Henderson passed by, muttering under his breath. "Creeps me out, sir. They don't blink, don't talk, just stare at the dirt all day." "They're soldiers," Carter said. "Same as you once were before the noise." Henderson scoffed. "Difference is, I fight like a man." "They hide in holes and play dead." Carter didn't answer. He simply took another sip and stared past the wire. Nurse Sarah Coleman moved from tent to tent, her medical kit rattling softly. She had learned to work fast, hands steady even when surrounded by blood. When she reached the prisoners, she found one coughing violently. His name, she learned later, was Private Nakamura. Young, too young. His uniform still carried the faint smell of sea salt and smoke. "You need water," she said, crouching beside him. Nakamura didn't respond, only watched her with wide, frightened eyes. She opened her canteen and offered it. After a moment's hesitation, he took a small sip, whispering a single trembling word. "Arigato." Sarah froze, then smiled softly. "Ah, you're welcome." Nearby, Corporal Sato observed the exchange with a wary gaze. He said nothing, but his shoulders stiffened, as if silently reminding Nakamura of their duty to remain proud, unyielding. Carter arrived just as Sarah finished checking Nakamura's pulse. "Everything all right?" he asked. "He's dehydrated. Needs rest and clean water," she replied. Carter nodded, signaling to the guards. "Get him some rations from the medic tent." Henderson, overhearing, frowned. "Sir, we're short on supplies. We start handing them our food, and next thing you know, they'll expect 3 meals and a movie." Carter turned, voice calm but firm. "We treat them humanely. That's not up for debate." Henderson's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. Hours crawled by under a punishing sun. The soldiers worked, the prisoners sat in silence, and the sea roared endlessly beyond the cliffs. Every sound, the creak of boots, the clang of mess tins, seemed heavier than it should have been. When dusk arrived, Sarah returned to the infirmary. Carter stopped by her tent, leaning on the frame. "You made an impression," he said quietly. "On who?" she asked. "Everyone." My men think you're too soft. The prisoners think you're an angel. She smiled faintly. Maybe kindness doesn't need a uniform. Carter looked toward the dark horizon. No, but it sure needs courage. As night settled, the hum of the generator returned. The projector flickered to life again somewhere in camp, laughter echoing faintly through the humid air. Sato sat against the fence, eyes fixed on the glow. For the first time his expression softened, if only for a heartbeat. The wind carried whispers long before the news was confirmed. Around the campfires, men spoke in low voices about what the Japanese had done to captured Americans on another island, how they lined them up, blindfolded, and left no one alive. The story changed with every retelling, growing darker each time until it became less rumor and more ghost story. Captain Carter heard it from Sergeant Miller first. They say the bastards executed 30 of our boys near Palawan, burned them alive. Carter said nothing at first. He just stared at the dirt, jaw tightening. Do we know that for sure? Miller shook his head. Doesn't matter. The men believe it. And they did. Rage began to simmer through the ranks like fever. Henderson, always loud, became its mouthpiece. They butcher our boys, and we feed theirs rice. Hell, they should be grateful we let them breathe. Carter stepped into the middle of the argument, voice steady but cutting through the heat. That's enough, Henderson glared. With all due respect, sir, you weren't there. You didn't see what they did at Tarawa. No, I didn't, Carter replied. But I know this. You start treating prisoners like animals. You start losing the war inside yourself. The men went silent. Henderson's eyes burned with resentment, but he turned away. Carter knew he'd only poured water on a fire that would find fuel again. By evening, the camp's mood had turned brittle. Guards were sharper, conversations shorter. The prisoners could feel it too. They sat motionless under the dim lights, their quiet dignity mistaken for defiance. When Carter returned to his tent, Sarah was waiting outside, her arms crossed. You heard what's going around? He nodded. I heard. It's spreading fast. The men are angry, scared. Henderson's making it worse. Carter rubbed the back of his neck. He's grieving in the only way he knows how. Sarah looked at him, eyes steady. Grief doesn't excuse cruelty. He sighed. No, it doesn't. A shout cut through the humid air, a commotion near the wire fence. Carter ran, his boots kicking up dust. 2 guards were pulling Henderson off a prisoner. Sato's face was bloodied, one eye already swelling shut. Henderson's fist was raised for another blow when Carter grabbed his wrist. Stand down, Carter barked. He spit on me, Henderson shouted, breathing hard. Carter turned to Sato, who was on his knees, his mouth trembling but closed. Did you? Sato didn't understand the words, but his silence spoke louder than any answer could. Carter faced Henderson again. If you strike another man under my command, I'll have you court-martialed. Do you understand me? Henderson's jaw clenched. He's the enemy, sir. So were the ones we buried last week, Carter said, his voice quiet now, dangerous in its calm. And we gave them graves, not cages. The soldiers nearby stood frozen. The only sound was the hum of the generator and Sato's labored breathing. Carter stepped back and looked at the men around him. Discipline isn't weakness, he said. It's what keeps us human. The words hung in the air like a challenge. The supply boat came at noon, cutting through the waves like a grey blade. Its engine noise drew every gaze in camp, Americans and prisoners alike. Men expected ammo, maybe mail, but what spilled from the crates was stranger. Canned peaches, cigarettes, a battered radio, and one dusty film projector with reels wrapped in brown paper. Sergeant Miller whistled low. A damn projector? Guess somebody up there thinks we're on vacation. Captain Carter bent down, brushing sand off the machine. Morale package, he said. Command wants the boys to remember what normal feels like. Normal. The word tasted foreign. By dusk, word spread. Movie night. The idea alone lifted something heavy off the soldiers' backs. Even Henderson cracked a grin for the first time in days. But when Carter suggested including the prisoners, that light vanished. You can't be serious, Henderson said, laughing bitterly. We're not entertaining the enemy. They're human, Carter replied. "A little light won't hurt anyone." "It'll hurt morale, sir." "Ours." Colonel Reeves overheard, stepping out from his tent like a storm cloud. "Carter, what the hell is this nonsense I'm hearing?" "Sir, the men could use a reminder of what they're fighting for. So could the prisoners." Reeves crossed his arms. "Hey, you're not running a Sunday school. This is a war zone. You want to show them a movie? Fine, but you'll answer for the outcome." Carter held his gaze. "Understood." Reeves turned sharply and left. Miller leaned close, voice low. "You really think that's a good idea?" Carter looked toward the barbed wire where the prisoners sat, shadows against the fading sun. "I think it's the right one." The night came thick and warm, carrying the smell of salt and oil lamps. The men dragged benches into a half-circle, while Miller tinkered with the generator, cursing under his breath. The projector sputtered, coughed, and finally threw a trembling beam of light onto a white sheet tied between two poles. The soldiers cheered, laughing like boys for the first time since they'd landed on the island. Sarah appeared, arms crossed but smiling. "I'll admit, Captain, this might actually work." Carter smiled faintly. "We'll see." He turned to Miller. "Bring the prisoners." The camp went silent. Every face turned toward him as the gate creaked open. The Japanese POWs filed in, guarded but unshackled, their movements careful, their expressions unreadable. Sato led them, spine straight, eyes scanning everything like a man trying to understand a foreign dream. The Americans muttered among themselves, "This is insane. They don't deserve this. What's next, Popcorn?" Carter raised a hand, silencing the noise. "They'll sit in the back." "You don't have to like it. You just have to live with it." When the lights dimmed, Sarah whispered, "What movie is it?" Carter smiled a little. "Something they sent from the USO. It's A Wonderful Life." She laughed softly. "Seems ironic, doesn't it?" He didn't answer. The projector hummed louder, its light slicing through the dark. Somewhere behind the wire, Sato's eyes caught the glow for the first time, reflecting wonder he didn't want anyone to see. The generator coughed once, twice, then caught, flooding the night with a faint, mechanical hum. The soldiers cheered half-heartedly, more out of habit than joy. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating dust, moths and faces, both familiar and foreign. The sheet fluttered slightly in the ocean breeze, trembling like a fragile window to another world. The first notes of music drifted out, soft, nostalgic, utterly out of place on an island scarred by war. It's a wonderful life. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Carter stood near the back, arms crossed, watching his men relax for the first time in weeks. Cigarettes glowed in the dark, laughter rippled like distant waves. A few guards even passed around a can of peaches, the syrup thick and golden. For a moment, it felt almost normal. At the far edge of the clearing, the Japanese prisoners sat apart. 10 of them, motionless, their eyes fixed on the flickering images. The guards kept rifles slung casually but within reach. Sato sat straight-backed, his expression carved from stone. Beside him, Nakamura leaned forward, eyes wide, lips slightly parted as if the glow itself had hypnotized him. On screen, an American family gathered around a Christmas tree. Children's laughter filled the camp. Some soldiers grinned, some swallowed hard. Others turned away, remembering home. Sarah whispered to Carter, "You think they understand it?" He shrugged. "Maybe they don't need to." The film rolled on. George Bailey's voice echoed, talking about hope, love, and purpose. The words didn't need translation. They carried something deeper, something human. Carter noticed Sato's hands clenched tightly on his knees, as though holding back something he couldn't name. When a guard muttered, "Can't believe we're wasting fuel on this," Carter shot him a look. "Let them watch," he said quietly. The night thickened, warm and still. Fireflies blinked beyond the fence, the stars faint under the wash of light. Sarah sat on a crate, chin in her hands, eyes soft. The glow painted everyone in shades of gold and grey, enemies and allies sharing the same fragile silence. A line from the film drew laughter, a moment of pure innocence. Nakamura turned to Sato, puzzled by the reaction. Sato hesitated, then leaned closer, whispering in Japanese. Nakamura nodded slowly, though his face showed only confusion and wonder. "They smile during war," Nakamura murmured, his accent fragile but clear. Sato didn't reply. His gaze returned to the screen where George Bailey hugged his family, where kindness seemed possible, even in chaos. Something inside him shifted, small, invisible, but real. As the reel clicked and rolled, Carter felt the strange weight of what was happening. He wasn't sure if it was foolish or profound, maybe both. But when he looked around, at Henderson watching quietly, at Sarah smiling faintly, at Sato's unblinking eyes, he knew this moment would linger. The film kept playing, the projector humming steady, as though the island itself had stopped breathing to listen. And for the first time since the war began, no one on either side wanted the night to end. Halfway through the movie, the projector coughed, sputtered, and went dark. The sudden silence was jarring, leaving only the chirp of crickets and the restless murmurs of the men. The light that had united them flickered out, replaced by the uneasy dark of the Pacific night. "Damn it," Sergeant Miller muttered, slapping the side of the projector. "Thing overheated." A few soldiers groaned. "Guess that's it for movie night," one said, already getting up. "Hold it," Carter ordered. "Give him a minute." Miller wiped sweat from his forehead. "If I can find the fuse, maybe I can fix it." "Do it," Carter replied. His voice was calm, but his eyes moved across the crowd. The soldiers shifting impatiently, the prisoners sitting motionless, confused by the interruption. Sarah stood up, brushing dust from her skirt. "I'll get lemonade," she said softly. Carter nodded, watching as she moved through the rows, offering cups to whoever reached out. Even Henderson accepted one, muttering a quiet thanks. Then she hesitated near the prisoners, her hand trembling slightly as she extended a cup toward them. Nakamura looked at it, unsure if it was a trick. He glanced at Sato, who gave a tiny nod. Slowly, Nakamura took the cup, bowing his head in silent gratitude. Some of the guards stared. Henderson muttered under his breath, "You're gonna spoil them." Sarah turned, her eyes sharp but calm. "Kindness isn't weakness, Sergeant." Henderson looked away. The tension dissolved when the projector hummed again, sputtering back to life. A cheer rippled through the camp. Miller gave a thumbs up. "Told you she just needed a break." Carter smiled faintly. "Good work." The film resumed, brighter than before. On screen, George Bailey ran through a snow-covered street shouting, "Merry Christmas!" The sound of laughter filled the humid air again. For a fleeting moment, no one cared about ranks, flags, or fences. They were all just people watching a man find his way back to hope. Sato leaned slightly toward Nakamura. "This is what their world is like," he whispered in Japanese. Nakamura's voice was soft. "Maybe this is what peace feels like." Sato frowned, trying to process the thought. Peace. Such a simple word, yet impossible to imagine after years of war and obedience. His eyes moved toward Carter, who stood behind his men, arms crossed, his face illuminated by the flickering glow. The night felt fragile, like glass that could shatter with one wrong word. But for now, it held. When the reel ended, the soldiers clapped, whistling and shouting at Miller to play another. Miller laughed. "If the damn thing doesn't explode, sure." Sarah smiled, collecting the empty cups. Carter caught her eye. "Not bad for a night in hell," he said quietly. She nodded. "Sometimes light is enough." Carter turned back toward the prisoners. Sato met his gaze across the shadows, not as enemies, not even as soldiers, but as two men standing on the same edge of something neither could name. The projector clicked softly, the reel slowing to a stop. But the silence that followed no longer felt empty. It felt alive. The morning after the movie night, the camp carried an unfamiliar quiet. The kind born not of exhaustion, but reflection. Men moved slower, spoke softer. Even Henderson, usually all edge and noise, offered no complaints during roll call. But peace in war was a fragile thing, and it never lasted long. By noon, a jeep arrived, throwing dust into the humid air. Inside sat a man in a crisp khaki uniform with polished boots and a camera slung around his neck. He stepped out smiling like someone who'd never seen blood. "Lieutenant John Avery, U.S. war correspondent," he announced. "Heard you boys were running a model operation out here." Carter met him halfway, shaking his hand with polite caution. "Depends what you call model, Lieutenant." Avery grinned. "Well, Washington's been getting reports. Humanitarian treatment of prisoners. A sense of moral leadership. Makes good news. Command sent me to capture it. Hearts and minds, you know?" Carter's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're here to film propaganda." Avery chuckled. "You say propaganda, I say inspiration. Americans back home need to see that our boys aren't savages." Before Carter could respond, Colonel Reeves appeared, straightening his uniform. "Lieutenant Avery, about time. Let's show the brass how clean this place runs." Reeves motioned to the guards. "Get those prisoners lined up. Let's make sure they look presentable." Carter frowned. "Sir, they're not actors." Reeves's tone sharpened. "They're soldiers, Captain. And today they're going to serve a different purpose. You'll cooperate." Avery raised the camera, snapping photos of the camp, the guards, the prisoners. "Beautiful," he said. "This'll look great in Life magazine." Carter followed him, uneasy. The men around him straightened their postures, forced smiles, while the prisoners stood rigid, silent and wary. Sato's jaw tightened as he caught the lens aimed at him. Avery leaned toward Carter. "You really held a movie night for them? That true?" "Yes." "That's gold. Mind if I film the projector? Maybe a shot of the prisoners watching." "They didn't do it for a show," Carter said, voice low. "It was for peace of mind." Avery smirked. "Peace of mind sells even better." Carter said nothing. Sarah passed by, arms full of supplies, and whispered, "He's turning compassion into a circus." "I know," Carter muttered. Later, as Avery filmed the camp, Reeves ordered the men to hand out food and water under the camera's eye. "Smile, damn it," Reeves barked. "You're the face of American decency." Carter watched the farce unfold, every frame of it staged. But among the performance, something genuine slipped through. Nakamura offering a hesitant smile when Sarah handed him bread. Sato bowing his head slightly toward Carter in acknowledgement. Avery caught it all without realizing what he'd captured. As the jeep departed that afternoon, Avery shouted, "This footage'll make waves back home. You'll thank me later, Captain." Carter didn't answer. He only watched the dust rise and vanish, the echo of the camera's clicks lingering in his mind. He didn't know it yet, but those reels would travel farther than any bullet. Rain began before dawn, soft at first, then relentless, drumming against tin roofs and muddying the paths between tents. The camp sank into a rhythm of damp fatigue. Men worked slower, tempers shorter, food colder. In the medical tent, Sarah's hands were trembling, not from fear but from exhaustion. She hadn't slept in 2 days. She moved between cots, checking temperatures, cleaning wounds. Then she saw Nakamura. The young prisoner's skin was pale and slick with sweat, his breathing shallow. She pressed a hand to his forehead. It burned like fire. "Captain," she called, her voice tight, "I need you in here." Carter entered, water dripping from his jacket. "What's wrong?" "It's him," she said, pointing to Nakamura. "Fever's spiking." "He's delirious." Carter looked at the prisoner, barely more than a boy whispering in Japanese, lost between dreams and fever. "What do you need?" "Penicillin. He's septic. If we don't start treatment now, he won't last the night." Carter hesitated. Supplies were low. The last shipment had barely covered their own wounded. Before he could answer, Colonel Reeves appeared at the tent entrance, his voice sharp. "What's the emergency?" Sarah faced him. "One of the POWs is dying. We need antibiotics." Reeves frowned. "You mean to tell me you're wasting our medicine on the enemy?" "It's 1 vial," she replied, "and it could save his life." Reeves's tone hardened. "Every drop we use on them is one we don't have for our men." "Let nature do its work." Carter stepped between them. "Sir, I can't stand by while someone dies in our custody." Reeves' eyes flashed. "You're not here to play savior. You're here to win a war." Carter's jaw tightened. "Maybe winning starts with remembering who we are." The colonel stared at him for a long moment, then turned and left without another word. Sarah exhaled shakily. "So that's it?" We just let him die? Carter looked around the tent. His men, their bandaged arms, the medicine chest with its single remaining vial. He made a decision. No, he said quietly. We save him. He unlocked the chest and handed her the vial. Write it off as a training dose. Sarah nodded, tears mixing with the rainwater on her cheeks. Thank you. As she prepared the syringe, Henderson stepped inside, dripping wet. You really going to risk your neck over him, sir? Carter turned to him. You don't have to agree with me, Sergeant. Just make sure no one reports it. Henderson hesitated. This is suicide if the colonel finds out. Carter met his eyes. Then we'll both be dead men walking. Now help her. For the first time, Henderson didn't argue. He held the lantern steady while Sarah administered the shot. Nakamura's breathing slowed, still shallow but steadier. Sarah whispered, Come on, kid. Hang in there. Outside, thunder rolled across the sea, the sound swallowing the camp whole. Carter stepped out into the rain, staring at the dark horizon. The storm felt like judgment and mercy, falling all at once. The sky broke open without warning. At first it was only a faint hum, distant, uncertain. Then the unmistakable drone of engines rolled across the horizon. Men looked up, their instincts kicking in faster than thought. Air raid, someone shouted. The alarm wailed, cutting through the humid afternoon like a blade. Carter sprinted from his tent, boots sinking into wet mud. Above, dark shapes emerged through the clouds, Japanese bombers glinting like metallic hawks. Get to cover, Carter yelled. Move! The camp erupted in chaos. Soldiers scattered, grabbing rifles, pulling helmets over trembling heads. Prisoners huddled near the fence, unsure whether to run or freeze. The first explosion hit near the shoreline, a deep, shattering boom that sent a wall of dirt and fire into the sky. Sarah ran toward the infirmary, clutching her medical bag. Carter! She screamed. The wounded! He caught her arm. No, Sarah, you can't! But she pulled free, eyes blazing with defiance. Then you better come with me. Another blast tore through the far side of camp, throwing debris into the air. Flames rose from the storage hut. Carter covered his face from the heat. Henderson, get the POWs into the trenches. Now! Henderson hesitated, torn between duty and hatred. Carter's voice sharpened. That's an order! He obeyed, shouting at the guards. The prisoners stumbled forward as explosions rained closer. Sato grabbed Nakamura, still weak from fever, and dragged him toward the ditch. Nakamura coughed violently, blood on his lips, but refused to stop. A shell landed near the barbed wire, tearing it apart. A guard fell, screaming. Shrapnel ripped through the ground. Carter dropped beside a trench, his ears ringing. He saw Sarah in the distance, shielding a wounded man with her body. Sarah! He roared. She turned, her face pale but determined. We can't leave them. The ground shook again. Sato threw himself over Nakamura, protecting him as the blast struck nearby. Dirt and smoke swallowed everything. When the dust cleared, Carter was already moving. He reached the prisoner's trench and saw Sato bleeding from his shoulder, still holding the boy down. Their eyes met, an instant of silent recognition, not of enemies, but of men surviving the same hell. Get him to the tent, Carter ordered. Sato nodded weakly, helping Nakamura to his feet. Henderson appeared, panting. Half the supply hut's gone. Radio's out. Carter's voice was hoarse. Then we dig out whoever's still breathing. Rain began to fall again, thick, heavy, steaming as it met the burning wreckage. The smell of smoke and salt filled the air. Carter and his men dragged bodies from the rubble, friend and foe alike. There was no difference anymore, just the living and the lost. As night fell, the bombing finally stopped. The island went silent except for the sound of the rain. Carter looked around. The camp in ruins, the ground littered with shattered helmets and torn flags. Sarah limped toward him, covered in soot. It's over, she whispered. Carter shook his head slowly. No, he said. Not yet. Dawn came grey and trembling, heavy with the smell of smoke and salt. The camp was barely standing, craters where the barracks once were, twisted metal, and silence so thick it pressed against the skin. Carter walked through the wreckage, boots sinking into wet ash. Every step was slow, deliberate, as if the ground itself was mourning. Bodies lay under torn canvas and splintered wood. Some were his men, some were theirs. The difference no longer mattered. Sarah knelt beside the wounded, her uniform soaked in blood and rain, whispering names. American, Japanese, anyone still breathing. Her voice was the only thing keeping the mourning from collapsing completely into despair. Henderson stumbled toward Carter, his face streaked with soot. "We lost 9, he said hoarsely. 3 of them ours." He paused. "But they helped us, sir. The prisoners." "When the bombs hit." Carter turned to him. "What do you mean?" "They dragged men out of the fire. Sato pulled Lieutenant Briggs from the trench. The bastard could have run, but he didn't." Carter looked toward the makeshift aid station. There, under a torn flag used as shade, Sato sat slumped, his shoulder bandaged, watching over Nakamura, who was barely conscious. Carter approached slowly. "You saved my man," he said quietly. Sato met his eyes. "War. Over there." He pointed weakly toward the sky. "Here, only men." Carter nodded, his throat tight. "Only men," he repeated. Behind them, Henderson knelt beside a burned-out jeep, setting down a helmet that no longer had an owner. "Didn't think they had it in them," he muttered, half to himself. "Guess I was wrong." Sarah overheard him. "You weren't wrong," she said softly. "You were just blind." He looked at her, ashamed but silent. The day dragged on. The wounded moaned. The dead were buried in rows, Americans and Japanese side by side, because there was no longer the strength or will to separate them. The rain had turned the graves into rivers of mud, washing away the lines that divided them. As the sun broke through the clouds, Carter stood beside Sarah, watching the smoke drift upward like grey prayers. "Maybe this is how peace begins," he said. She wiped her face with a trembling hand. "Peace," she whispered. "It feels too fragile. Everything worth keeping is." From the other side of the camp, Sato struggled to his feet. Nakamura leaned on him for balance. They bowed deeply toward Carter and his men. No words, no flags, just the kind of respect that doesn't need translation. Henderson stepped forward, removing his helmet. For the first time, he returned the bow. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about understanding. Carter stood motionless for a moment, taking in the sight. The hum of the sea returned, soft and steady. The war would rage elsewhere, but here, amid ruin and loss, something sacred had survived. He turned to Sarah. "Write it down," he said quietly. "Every detail. Someday people should know this happened." She nodded. "That we fought?" He shook his head. "No. That we remembered." 2 weeks after the bombing, a supply plane descended through a haze of sea wind and smoke, bringing mail, medicine, and orders. The camp had begun to breathe again. Barely. The trenches were filled in, the wounded stabilized, and the dead remembered. But Carter felt no relief when the radio crackled that morning. Sergeant Miller rushed in, holding a dispatch. "Sir, this just came through from HQ. You're not going to believe this." Carter took the papers and scanned them, his brow furrowed. "They've seen the footage." Miller nodded. "The movie night. That journalist, Avery. He sent it back home." Carter leaned against the table, his mind spinning. "And?" Miller smirked. "You're famous, sir. The papers are calling it mercy on the front lines. The War Office says morale's never been higher. Hell, they're using your picture in the Washington Post." Carter let out a breath that was half disbelief, half weariness. "All we did was show a movie. Apparently that's enough to make you a hero." Sarah entered then, wiping her hands on a cloth. "What's going on?" Miller grinned. "Captain's a national symbol now. They're saying his compassion inspired a new code of conduct." Sarah looked at Carter, a faint smile on her lips. Maybe people needed to see something good for once. But Carter didn't smile. "They don't know the half of it. They don't see the blood, the fear, the choices." She stepped closer. "No, they see hope. That matters too." Outside, Henderson approached with a radio clipped to his belt. "Sir, HQ wants confirmation. You'll authorize an interview. They're sending a reporter next week." Carter stared at him. "Interview? What the hell am I supposed to say? That kindness is convenient when the cameras are rolling? Henderson hesitated. You could say it kept us human, sir. Because it did. The words caught Carter off guard. Coming from Henderson, the man who once spat at prisoners, they carried weight. You really believe that? Henderson nodded. After what we saw? Yeah, I do. Carter looked out over the camp. The POWs were rebuilding fences beside American soldiers, working in silence side by side. The line between them had faded with the ashes. Sarah joined him at the edge of the tent. Maybe the world's finally catching up to what happened here, or maybe it's rewriting it, Carter replied. They'll make it sound clean. They'll never say how hard it was to choose mercy when hate felt easier. She touched his arm. Then tell them. Tell the truth. He nodded slowly. If mercy is naive, he said quietly, I'll wear the name proudly. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of the sea, salt, smoke, and the faint sweetness of burning coconut oil from the field kitchen. Somewhere nearby, a projector flickered again, replaying It's a Wonderful Life for the Recovering Men. Miller called out from behind. Captain, they're asking what you want your headline to be. Carter didn't turn. Don't give them one, he said. Just tell them we remembered what it means to be human. The afternoon was calm for the first time in months. The waves rolled slow against the shore, gulls circling above the broken pier. The war felt distant now, as if it belonged to another lifetime. Yet in the camp its shadow lingered. Nakamura was recovering, thin but alive. He sat outside the infirmary, a blanket draped over his shoulders. The fever had stolen his strength, but not his curiosity. His eyes followed the American soldiers as they repaired what remained of the barracks, laughing and shouting in that strange, rhythmic English he still couldn't fully grasp. Sato stood beside him, his arm in a sling. His posture was still proud, though the lines on his face had deepened. Soon we go home, he murmured in Japanese. Nakamura turned to him. Home? He said the word softly, as if testing whether it still meant anything. After all this, what does that even look like? Sato didn't answer. He watched the Americans hauling lumber, working side by side with the prisoners without a word of hostility. There was something disarming about it, something he couldn't quite name. Sarah approached them, carrying a tray of water. She smiled gently, her blue eyes bright despite the weariness in them. You both look better today, she said. Nakamura nodded, understanding enough to smile back. Better, he echoed. Sato accepted the cup she offered, bowing slightly. Thank you, he said, his English careful, almost ceremonial. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then asked, How are you feeling? Sato searched for the words. Alive, he said finally. That is new. She smiled faintly. Alive is good. For a long moment they stood in silence. The sound of hammering and distant laughter filled the air. Then Sato looked up at her again, his brow furrowing with a question he'd carried for days. Miss Sarah, he said slowly, his accent thick but his voice steady, do they treat all prisoners like this? The words hung between them, heavy and honest. Sarah blinked, caught off guard. I mean, he continued, struggling to find the right phrase. Food, care, movie, you, kind. Why? Sarah glanced at Carter across the yard, where he was speaking with Henderson. We try, she said finally. We try to treat men like men, no matter the uniform. Sato repeated the words quietly, as though tasting their meaning. Men like men. He turned toward Nakamura, who nodded slowly, his eyes shining. Sarah knelt to meet their gaze. The war will end one day, she said softly. When it does, remember this. Mercy isn't weakness. It's what keeps us from becoming what we fight. Sato looked at her, the faintest trace of emotion breaking through his stoicism. You, strong woman, he said. Sarah smiled. Only when I have to be. Behind them, Carter watched the exchange in silence. He couldn't hear their words, but he understood them all the same. He turned away, his throat tightening, a single thought echoing in his mind. If only the whole world could ask that same question. The news came quietly, like a whisper carried by the wind. It arrived not through gunfire or commands, but through a single radio transmission that stopped every hand in the camp. Japan has surrendered. The words hung in the humid air, fragile, almost unbelievable. For a long moment, no one moved. Then murmurs began, some relieved, some uncertain, some hollow. The war, they said, was over. Carter stood by the radio, staring at the static that followed. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, victory parades, flags, cheering crowds, but standing there, surrounded by ruins and graves, it felt nothing like triumph. It felt like exhaling after holding one's breath for years. Henderson approached, his voice quieter than usual. "So that's it, sir, it's done?" Carter nodded slowly. "It's done, at least, for us." Outside, the camp began to shift. Prisoners gathered in silence, eyes turned toward the sky, each man processing the impossible in his own way. Sato stood among them, his arm still in a sling. He looked neither relieved nor defeated, only tired. Sarah walked toward Carter, carrying a small wooden box. "They'll be leaving soon," she said. "Command's arranging repatriation." He nodded, his gaze distant. "You'd think peace would feel cleaner than this," she smiled faintly. "Peace never comes clean, it just stops the bleeding." Together they walked toward the group of prisoners. Sato and Nakamura stepped forward, bowing deeply. Sarah returned the gesture, her eyes glistening. Carter extended his hand. "You're going home," he said. Sato hesitated before taking it. "Home," he repeated softly. "Yes." "But not same home." Their hands met, a soldier's grip, firm but weighted with memory. Nakamura bowed again, speaking in halting English. "Thank you, Captain, for mercy." Carter shook his head. "You earned your own." Sarah opened the box she carried. Inside was a small Bible, its cover worn from use. She handed it to Nakamura. "For peace," she said. He took it with both hands, as if holding something sacred. "I keep," he promised. Henderson stood nearby, watching. When Carter glanced at him, he shrugged. "Didn't think I'd ever say this, sir, but I'm going to miss them." Carter smiled faintly. "That's how you know you're human again." A truck engine roared to life. The prisoners boarded slowly, exchanging silent nods with the soldiers who had once guarded them. The air was thick with something unspoken. Respect, perhaps, or forgiveness, pretending not to be forgiveness. As the last man climbed aboard, Sato turned back one final time. "Good men," he said simply. Then the truck rumbled away, vanishing down the muddy road that led to the port. Carter stood there long after it was gone. The sea breeze rustled through the camp, carrying with it the scent of salt and smoke. Sarah looked at him. "What now?" He glanced toward the horizon. "We rebuild. And maybe we learn." For the first time in months, the island felt still. Not silent, not broken, just still. The years passed quietly, the war fading into history like smoke over calm water. In Kansas, the fields rolled golden under the sun, stretching farther than the ocean ever had. Captain William Carter, now simply Bill, sat on the porch of his farmhouse, the evening breeze tugging at the loose papers in his hand. The letter was half-written, the ink slightly smudged. He had started and stopped a dozen times, unsure how to end a story that never truly ended. He looked out at the barn across the yard. Its doors were open, and from within came the faint whir of an old projector, the same one that had once flickered light across an island scarred by war. Now it threw its trembling glow against the wooden boards, replaying It's a Wonderful Life for an audience of one. He smiled faintly. "Still running after all this time," he murmured. From inside the house, his wife called, "You writing to Sarah again?" He chuckled, trying to. "She'll scold me if I don't finish before winter." He returned to the letter. "Dear Sarah, I used to think war was about conquering, land, men, pride, but now I think the hardest thing to conquer is hate itself." He paused, tapping the pen against the table. The memories came back uninvited. Henderson's defiant glare softening after the air raid, Sato's bow of respect, Nakamura's trembling voice saying thank you, moments carved into him deeper than scars. He kept writing. Sometimes I wonder if mercy ever really changes anything. Then I remember that night, the movie, the laughter, the silence that came after. I remember how enemies became human again, if only for an hour. And I think maybe that's enough. Maybe it always was. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of cut hay and distant rain. The sound of children laughing echoed from across the field. For a second, he imagined the voices of his old comrades among them, timeless and unburdened. He continued. The war taught me 1,000 things, but none more important than this. Kindness doesn't need a flag, it just needs courage. And I learned that from a nurse who refused to stop caring, a sergeant who learned to forgive, and 2 men who bowed before they left for home. Carter leaned back, reading the words over. His hands had grown slower, the veins sharp beneath the skin, but the weight of the pen felt the same as it had on that island, when every word had mattered. He signed the letter simply, Bill. Then, after a long pause, he added one final line. P.S. The projector still works. Every time I watch it, I remember that night, and I like to think the world's a little better for it. He folded the page, slid it into an envelope, and looked once more toward the barn. The flicker of the reel reflected faintly in his eyes. On the wall, Jimmy Stewart's voice echoed, No man is a failure who has friends. Bill Carter smiled softly. Amen to that, he whispered.